Hello and welcome, Doomloopers, to another episode of the Doomloop Dispatch, the new show that covers all the worst parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm your host, Kevin L. Jones, who usually should be with me is D. Scott Miller, but it's the holidays, so he's busy. Hopefully he'll be jumping on soon, but we got a great guest today. We have Ryan LaLonde, an artist, a school board member of the Alameda County School Board, and the communications consultant for the No on Recall for Pamela Price campaign. And we are so blessed to have him here because we have so many questions about this campaign, what happened, and what is the future for this position. So, hi, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm good. I'll clarify that I was the communications consultant for Pamela's election. And
Sorry.
I mean, there was a little consultation, obviously, because Pamela's a friend, but I was not an official consultant. But it is I felt like I've already put my time in.
Understandably. Yeah, you won too, you know?
Yeah, I did that, and then I served as the communications director in the DA's office for the first 3 months.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Okay. Well, actually, but before we get into kind of that background, how did you get involved with Alameda politics? Were you a school board member before you started getting into communications?
So my husband and I, we moved here in 2015. Our son at the time was in elementary school, and so enrolled him in school in second grade at that point. And I started getting involved in the school site kind of stuff, and school site council, PTA president, and then the island-wide PTA president, and then helped another individual run for Alameda Unified School Board. And then she won. And then I ran a bond measure for the school district, and we won that bond measure. And then when the time came in 2022 that we needed good school board members in the Alameda Unified School Board District, not a lot of people were stepping up. And so at the very last day of filing, I filed because I didn't want, there was an anti-LGBTQ person running, and I didn't want that person to win. So that's how I entered that. Before all of that, I worked in public relations for over 20 years in DC and Chicago. My husband was Al Gore's press secretary for his campaign, and Senator Harkin's press secretary. So I, through osmosis and just family life, worked a lot on those campaigns through Iowa. And I worked on campaigns in Michigan and Illinois, and I consult for campaigns here. My goal is every campaign cycle is to find one campaign that I truly believe in the candidate and think that they'll make a difference, and then volunteer my time. So I don't get paid.
Oh, wow. Well, that's wonderful, though. Like, you truly are giving back. I gotta appreciate that.
It also bodes well for not getting paid, because then they don't, like, they're not surrounded by yes people. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them the truth. Like, you're not paying me to say this. I'm just telling you that this is the way it should be. Yeah.
Totally. And I can appreciate that. Yeah. I know that's a thing, especially when looking at how this election all went down and how highly paid a lot of these consultants, who are refusing to take any responsibility for the loss,
You'll find that after the election is when everyone starts turning in their invoices, and you'll see these large sums of $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. I mean, they're paying them for, 6 months worth of work all of a sudden. And then you'll also start seeing the grift of, oh, this person got like a nice job in the office, or this person's doing this. It's kind of the pay to play kind of thing a little bit sometimes.
Oh, bummer. Yeah, no, I still remember that the profile on Bob Shrum, who ran Kerry's campaign, and about how he kind of pushed out all the other consultants, anyone else that was winning. And then when they lost, he was still sitting on the beach drinking cocktails, getting a suntan, said a lot.
Yeah. When we did Pamela's campaign for DA, she did something really different than other campaigns hadn't done. And she had 3 campaign managers. she broke up the county. Our county is so big, and so to have one campaign manager managing the whole county is it's hardly possible. Like there's so many different pockets of understanding that you have to have for this county, and so she divided the county into 3 segments and had a campaign manager for each of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I could kind of appreciate it though, especially having like an, somewhat of an understanding of the county. I mean, what is it about Alameda County voters that you don't think most people would recognize? I mean, especially with everyone thinking that, this area is just like the leftist of the left. Like we're walking around with hammers and sickles everywhere we go,
I mean, that's the thing. It's really, I mean, it has the population base of progressivism within Oakland, Berkeley, kind of as a center point, but the county is so much bigger than that and grander. And like space wise, I mean, it takes you an hour and a half to get from one end to the other. I mean, it is a large county. I mean, I think it's the 2nd largest county in California. So it has pockets and bubbles, and those bubbles create their own worlds. And if you're not a part of those worlds, you don't know how to impact that bubble. And so making sure that you have, the campaign managers all grew up or lived in those areas. That wasn't anybody from LA coming in or North Carolina or like other people do. I see so many times people will hire an LA consultant, and I'm like, that's not going to go well.
Totally. I could see that. Well, so you help out with Pamela's campaign and they win. Awesome. And you're working in for three months as communications director. But then it seemed like the recall happened, like it started the week she came into office. Like, did you see these signs of the recall coming? Did you know it was happening?
I mean, on election night, Pamela was down by 8.5% in the initial, and by the end of all the counting, she was ahead by 7.1% in the very end. So that was a 15% change over time. Her opponent, they had a celebration. They thought they won. So there wasn't a lot of let's recall Pamela on election night. As the shift started to happen and people had the realization that she was going to win, is the first times I saw the hashtag happening of recall Pamela Price. And I screen grabbed all of them. I wrote down all the names of people who were saying it. And on day one, I told her, and she'll admit this if you were to ask her, I told her who's going to lead the recall campaign.
Oh, and who was it?
I said it was going to be Brenda and Carl, based on Brenda had been sending emails to the office that we were getting, and that all come through my department as communications director. And it was just these not based in reality claims of what the office was doing. And I was like, we had only been there for like 2 weeks and she's claiming that we're doing certain things that we weren't doing. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. And Brenda had been a paid consultant in the previous administration. She would get tons of money to talk about victim rights and families' rights in the pursuit of justice. At conferences, the former DA would pay for her to go to these conferences. She did a commercial campaign, and then she was a consultant when it came to our office. So she was losing out on some benefits in the administration. And what's funny is, the very first, I always thought there was always going to be this chance of a recall because we had already seen it happen, obviously, in San Francisco. And so during the middle of our campaign, like when Chesa lost was during our primary, where Pamela was so far ahead. And that's actually when people started talking about by saying, look how far, people thought she won the primary because she was they didn't understand how our primary system worked. And so we were hearing recall her now. And I was like, she hasn't even won. That was just the primary. It narrowed it down to 2. And then that was from the folk that didn't understand things. And then once they understood, it got hot and heavy. There was always this track of Pamela's anti-Asian in everything that came through and who was saying it and who they were connected with. which is why I thought Carl would always be a part of it, because he was the most vocal person.
And just for our listeners, we should probably explain who Brenda and Carl are.
Yeah, so Carl Chan lives here in Alameda where I live, but he's very involved in Oakland politics, and he's the head of the Business Chamber of Commerce for the Chinatown business area. And he has great stances on some things and other things not. And then Brenda is a family rights activist that's been working hard within the Oakland community, supporting families whose loved ones have died to gun violence, even police violence, if you will, and advocating for their rights, but has been just kind of supporting police and the previous DA. So a lot of this has to do with an agenda that was long predetermined before we even got into office.
Yeah, so that was also a big part of that great interview Pamela did with Oakland Side, which I'll link to, where she kind of explained about just how, I mean, it seemed like so much of the ire being directed to her were the people that were basically booted out when she came in. Basically, she kind of upended this system that was expecting to just keep on ruling.
Yeah. I mean, there's never been an outside candidate that has won that office. It's always been the number 2 of the office that's always won that office. There's been people who've run. I think the last time was 1972 was the last time an outsider ran, and like it was close. And then when Pamela ran in 2018, that was the first full-on campaign that a DA had to really face. And the community didn't really understand what a DA even did at that point. I think that was when DAs started kind of coming into the limelight of what is their role in social justice? What is their role in criminal justice reform? And I think that was the taste that the county got as to, oh, here's a Nancy O'Malley. I didn't really know what she did. And it was up to the community to kind of educate. And it took those 4 years to educate, where they then said, yeah, we want to change the system. We don't like what we're seeing. The problem is that their choice was between the status quo again, or Pamela, who was going to radically probably change it more than they understood how it needed to be changed.
Oh, okay. And what were some of the big changes, especially that she was targeting and wanted to jump on?
I think the biggest one that people needed to have the most education on and understand the outcomes was something that we faced our very first week, which was the idea of enhancements to cases. So enhancements lead to life without parole. They add on years to a sentence. And that's typically why they are added to a case, is because they just don't want this person ever to see the light of day again. And they want to bury them in years. Also, I will say that practices within DA's offices of yesteryear, if you could get a conviction for like 380 years, it bode well for you when it came to review time. Like you were actually rewarded for getting more and more years added onto a sentence. That's just kind of, I mean, it's one of those legacy things that kind of carries over. Like that's their idea, is like their goal is to put people away. And what we were seeing was that it was costly to add on all these extra things, because you have to win and prove and file all those motions. And 2, it was kind of pointless. Like no one's going to serve 250 years. Like, for instance, we had a defendant who was like 75 years old. He was already going to be serving 50 years. That was pretty much life without parole. It's a death sentence in prison. But, the community got upset when we got rid of the stuff that would lead to life without parole in that. But it's really tax saving mentality on that. But on top of it, it's also the hard balance is, well, one, that office never had a communications department. So it never really needed to communicate what it was doing to the public previously. And so we changed that when we came in. We created a communications director position. We figured out how to do internal communications. There wasn't a way for everyone to have a conversation about stuff within the office. It wasn't like an intranet or like a chat system where we could all talk. In fact, they were all paper-based probably to 2018, COVID really forced them to get digital in the office. But I think that the idea of what life without parole meant when she said that, she was against the death penalty, but she was also against life without parole. Meaning, in the context of what we were talking about, is that if someone was under the age of 25, we're not going to add on so many charges that they're in jail forever. That we felt like fundamentally youth don't understand sometimes a lot of their actions, and to be held to account for those at such a young age without there being the idea of rehabilitation. I mean, people think there's a type of person that thinks jail is just to put people away forever and never see them again. Then there's a type that's like, this should be about making them a better person and accountability and rehabilitating them. And so I'm more in that vein, that's what it should be. Is our system really that way?
Mm-hmm.
I think there are good people that come out and want to do good, but they've had to find that path themselves.
Yeah. And that is such a great point too, because I remember being in a sociology class in undergrad, and the lecturer was a former probation officer, and he said that when probation officers start out, all the people they get are the murderers, the killers, because by the time they've served a long sentence and they're out, they're the easiest people to deal with. They don't want to go back. Like they're also like older. We're talking like 50s, 60s.
We had an interesting thing happen for us too when we were first taking the office in 2023 in that January, which was there was a new rule going in statewide where if you had been under the age of 25 and were sentenced for something that was more than 25, or if you were under the age of 18 when you were convicted and served more than 25 years for that conviction, they were letting those individuals out. And so their sentences were all being reduced. It has nothing to do with our office or anybody's office. It's just what the state was doing when it came to the justice reform work that they were doing. And so you were having, someone that entered prison as a teenager come out 25 years later and not understand this world. And there's no net for them when they come out. There's no programs for them to understand the world that they're coming into, how to be an adult outside of prison. And so there are programs that are happening. There's an amazing one called CROP in Oakland that it's doing just that work. The way that we kind of look at the office is that there's a stewardship that comes with, if we've convicted you, we should also make sure that when you come back, you're doing good. And so that's why the office was so focused on those individuals also getting out of jail.
Okay. Yeah. And and also too, we should just have less people in jail. I mean, that was actually a good thing, especially, misdemeanors, that kind of thing. Some of the stuff people are jailed for, like should not be that big of a deal,
I mean, that's the thing. There's so many letters that come into the DA's office from people who have been in jail or sitting in Santa Rita even, right? They can write letters and we get them. And I'll never forget this letter. It just showed me this catch-22 system that we have. It was from this individual who was a security guard and had a gun license, and he got pulled over, and he didn't have his paperwork on him, and so he was pulled over and they found the gun, and so he went to Santa Rita, and he just got kind of lost in the system in Santa Rita, and so he couldn't get someone to come bring his paperwork. There was always this back and forth, and it took like 3 weeks for it to get resolved. And in that 3 weeks, he lost his job. He missed rent, and he was already kind of a renter who had some issues, so that he was evicted. So he comes out, he doesn't have a job. He doesn't have his gun anymore. So being a security guard, there's a lot of licensure stuff around that. 2, he doesn't have a place to live. His car was impounded, and then he has all these fees that he has to pay. And he then said, now I'm homeless, and they dropped all the charges. And literally his one stint in Santa Rita made him homeless.
Yeah. people don't understand the impact of this stuff on top of the stuff that's on your record and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, awful. Well, yeah. So, but let's get into kind of the stuff that was used against Price, and
Okay.
especially how so much of it could be egregious,
Yeah.
like some of the things that were really like, I mean, for what do you think was actually like, you have the like misdemeanor cases being dropped, you have the thing with the cops that shot the guy on the stoop. That was even before her, but then later when she tried to charge the cops but didn't send out the arrest warrants, that was used against her as like, look, she's incompetent. She doesn't even know what she's doing. You also have the Berkeley Scanner thing, which as a journalist, I actually was kind of like, I understand where Price is coming from because it's clear to me, and I know Emily. I have worked with Emily.
Yeah.
She is shady. This is not journalism. This is, I used to say the same thing about Fox News, and people are like, oh, journalism. It's all journalists. It's like, no, Fox News is not journalism. And it's hard for me to consider Berkeley Scanner a true fourth estate, like a true news publication when it is so clearly biased. But of those things, if you could start into like, what do you think was twisted the hardest to hurt her? I think that would be great.
Well, I think right out of the gate, the thing that was twisted the most was probably the death of Jasper Wu. That, the charges were filed before we were in office and against 4 defendants. And there was gang charges added on to them. And as we know, Pamela campaigned on gang charges are inherently kind of based in, it's not like we have white gangs roving around the area. Actually, we do. We actually have a lot of white Aryan Nation and Irish gangs, but no one ever talks about them. But the gang enhancements kind of come with a little bit of racial bias to them. And so looking at them through different lenses, saying we can still charge them with things, just doesn't need to have this enhancement. I knew right out of the gate that was going to be an issue. That was being made an issue by Carl right off the bat. He went right to the victim's family and told them, this new DA is going to let these criminals free. And that became the storyline when that was not even true. In fact, I mean, there's all, Pamela is charging 3 of the 4. One was in the car, I had no idea what was happening, was in the back seat, I believe was a minor. And so whether or not, so minors, we can't talk about what their cases are, right? Like we can't say if they're being charged or what. You'll never see anyone under the age of 18, their story in the media or what's happening with them, because they have the right to be able to rehabilitate and come back from it in some way. But she still charged them. They're still like, the amount of time that they're going to do is a lifetime of years if convicted. And a lot of those things are up to the judge as well. If the judge wants to do consecutive time or concurrent time, like all those kinds of things are up to the judge. Prosecutors will make a recommendation. Ultimately, the judge decides. But the hard part that comes with that office, and I've kind of alluded to this a little bit, is that we could not communicate about some things. Like it hurts the case for us to put it out in the court of public opinion or put details of a case and expose what we're going to be doing to defense, right? So like, we're not going to be saying what we're doing in advance. 2, we're also not going to be telling the public what we're doing in advance before we actually talk to the family and have a conversation about this is what we're doing. That's why there's Marcy's Law, which makes it so that the victim or the victim's family, if the victim's no longer here, is notified of what we're doing before the general public knows. And that's really hard. That takes a lot of coordination. On these cases that have been like 15 years old, those family members don't even live here, right? And there's one point of contact, right? So if the victim has passed away and let's say the wife is the contact, and the wife now lives in North Carolina, and doesn't have anything much to do with the case, she's the person we're contacting to let them know. But that person who passed away might have brothers and sisters or an aunt or parents that live in the area. They weren't our point of contact, so they're not notified. So what we were getting in the media was the mother of such and such had no idea that so-and-so is being released from jail. And it's like, well, our office is only supposed to communicate with the person who is the legal contact with the office, the legal heir, if you will. If they're not communicating with you, that is not our office's fault. Now, granted, everyone's like, oh, well, you should be talking to the parents too. Well, then that makes every case that we have going through us, and there's 27,000 cases that go through that office in a year. That means we now have multiple contact points, and that's just not an efficient way to run an office. It also doesn't sound very compassionate when I'm saying that too. Like, we're not telling the whole family, and but it's one of those things where it's hard to notify everybody. So we were getting beat over the head for that, and I couldn't go on national TV basically and say that victim's family is lying.
Yeah,
Like, I can't
that always goes great.
that goes over really well. And so we just became quiet, right? Like, you just kind of let it play out, because also we have a case to go through. And if we start talking about the case too much, details get out there, and then you end up losing those cases because you've given away all the facts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a delicate balance. And what I'll say is, we walked into a landmine field when we entered that office. So the Alameda County Prosecutors Association paid almost $500,000 in a campaign against Pamela winning. So that's all funded and paid for by attorneys in that office. That's their dues paying for it. So we're walking into an office that paid $500,000 to make sure we weren't there.
Yeah.
And so,
talk about hostile.
Yeah. And we're coming in also as the first Black woman district attorney. So there's a lot of racial lacing to everything that kind of happened onto this. And that, there was the most Black people on that floor when we walked in on that first day than that they've ever seen that weren't defendants or their family.
Oh my God.
Right? Like,
wow.
It was that feeling when we walked in. There was only two of the cabinet. Only two of us were not African-American.
Whoa.
So it was a radically physically looking change for them, but also mentally changing. Like, there was a power shift, a dynamic shift, and a lot of people were not happy with it. There's a lot of resignations on the desk when we got in there. People that were like, I'm not going to even stick around to see what happens. I don't align. There were a lot of people who, knew their heads were on the chopping block, but Pamela can't fire attorneys. The way that it works is that you have to show cause, and you have to have it documented, and you basically go through a mini trial with the union to show the just cause for the firing. And so keeping them in the office where they're toxic and they're trying to harm things or leak things to the media, which was pretty much why I did not last the 3 months. I probably would have stayed if it wouldn't have been such a hostile work environment. And what I mean by that, I could be talking to an attorney about something, and I say something and it's leaked to the media.
Oh God. And
I just couldn't trust people. And you can't work in an office where you're not trusting your coworkers. And I've seen it, and it's so infuriating. Like, I see like them recording Teams meetings and leaking them to the media now, and they're using those. Like, I saw it between the victim's right person and an attorney was having a training, and that was leaked. Internal documents were leaked. And so here was the funny thing. I learned this trick from a friend when we lived in DC, and we were having leaks happen in one of the congressional offices. And it's kind of brilliant, and no one knew I was doing it. And this is like my big thing where I figured out who the leaks were, because I put typos specifically into so we created batches, and we released things out in the office into batches. So like charging individuals, lower level lawyers, blah, blah, blah. And I had different typos in it, so that I would know that if that document got leaked, it was from this bundle of people who got it in their email. because I could find the typo.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to figure out who our leak was. So.
Oh man, God dang, that's so well. Here's a question.
Do you want to know who the leak was?
Actually, I do. Yeah, if you want to tell me, yeah.
It's Butch Ford.
Oh, okay. Oh my God, yeah. I will put in
Emily pretty much already said that that's who her point of contact was, and he's pretty much already said that was what he was doing. Like, and then when he was put on administrative leave, I found this out after he had already been put on administrative leave. But I found out that he was also leaking he would come to, there's a bar by the office, and at 5 o'clock when people would get off work, he had people in the office that would go meet him at the bar and tell them everything that happened that day and bring copies of the documents to show that these things were happening.
So. Oh my God. Yeah, and I'm just looking at the whole, this Berkeley Scanner story about the case that was brought against Ford being dropped, and like she's making it seem like people are, talk about people crying and stuff like that.
Well, that the office, I mean, one, she's not an individual who even really covered any of that before we got into the office.
Yep.
The communications person that was there, I kept all of Nancy's staff. I felt they understood how to write a press release. They understand the legal side of it to some extent. They've been doing this. They had the points of contact. They knew where everything was. I liked them as individuals. I met with them during the transition. I was the co-chair of the transition into the office. So I was at all the transition meetings. I thought they were good, competent, and still think they're good, competent people. None of them work there anymore. They all left after I did. But I liked them. And even they said that they had never really interacted with a lot of these reporters that all of a sudden became very interested. And Emily was very, like, from day one, very interested. And I think it's because of Berkeley Police Union. So they would feed her a lot of information before all of this. Yeah. And as soon as we came into office, all those unions were organizing to put the most negative light on Pamela possible. Because they also paid as a union her first campaign, they paid almost $500,000 collectively. This one is very strange. They did not support her opponent because her opponent's family had some run-ins with police that they didn't like. And so they were supporting a different candidate during the primary. So after the primary, they didn't know where to put their money. And what I think they decided to do, and this is my hypothesis, is they decided to hold their money and see what happened. And if Pamela did win, use that money to do a recall. Pretty much what happened. So I think she was getting fed like all this information from them. And so when we first got in office, I would get emails from her to be like, we hear you're doing X, Y, and Z. Will you comment? And so I would get this email at 6 a.m. I don't get into the office till about 8:30 because I have to drop my son off at school. I have to drop the dog. So here's the thing. I was not used to having a full-time job. And so like I had to drop a dog off at daycare now and a kid at school and get to work. And so I was getting there about 8:30. By the time I got settled and did my debriefing with my team, it would be 9:15, and that's when we're going to start. We go through all the emails that we got. What are we going to say? Who needs this? Like, what do we got to do? Let's get back to them now. We'd get back to them about between 9 and 9:30 was the goal, right? She would run stories at like 9 a.m. after sending a 6 a.m. email saying that there was no comment from our office. And I was like, you didn't give me time to comment. I have to actually, like, I'm not just doing things on my own. I actually have to run things past the DA sometimes and get her take on it. We're all new to this office, and I just don't want to say anything that isn't true or is not what we're doing. And there's so many cases. Like I said, there's 27,000 that go through that office typically. And there's so many people wanting information about cases. Like there was a Chihuahua farm in Dublin where there was 85 Chihuahuas taken by animal control. And we had the Daily Mail wanting to get exclusive rights to utilize the story and interview the DA about this Chihuahua farm. Just these requests were crazy. And then we'd have requests for like, can we have the attorney who worked on this case to come on Snapped or on Oxygen Network and do an interview? And so it's like, it's a bigger deal than what people really think about.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, as a journalist with 20 years experience, you do not run a story until you give a proper amount of time for the person you ask a question for to respond. So that was just journalistic malfeasance from Emily, and I'll be on record to say that is unfair
It happened
to you.
numerous times where I would answer her question, but she didn't like my answer.
Wow.
So she would say that we didn't comment on it. And I was like, I literally sent you a comment. And she goes, well, I don't feel like it answered it.
Oh, she does not get to make that call.
Yeah. That happened a lot. And so this was happening over and over. And then obviously she was getting leaked information and running with it and running with anonymous sources. Mm-hmm. There's a code of ethics in that office that all the attorneys sign when they come into the office that say that they're not going to harm a case by going to the media, right? And leaking information. And that happened in our very first week, where what we were doing on a sentencing with Henry Lee knew what we were doing sentencing wise before I even did.
Jesus Christ.
And I was like, we haven't even made that determination. And Pamela goes, we haven't even filed that. There's no way he can know that unless someone in this office told him. And I was like, so now Henry Lee has a story saying what we're doing on a case. We haven't even informed the victim's family, which is a Marcy Law violation if we had actually intended for that to happen, which we didn't. It wasn't us leaking it. Someone, I have suspicions that wasn't. There was a very small room, and we think we know. I think it was a secretary, to be honest.
Oh.
But because everybody in that room wouldn't jeopardize that case. That case was really important. And that's the part that just boggled my mind. Sometimes people didn't, as much as they say that they cared about victims and families, they were doing things that were so harmful to them overall. Like even Jasper Wu's family, I really they were so used by people, and they lost a 3-year-old in the most horrific, most graphic way when they did all the press releases and stuff. They went into detail that I just think is just horrific for that to be in the ether for people to know. And it just boggles my mind sometimes. I think with me, my issue with Emily was that I didn't trust her to tell the truth.
As honest as you should have.
And time and time again, she didn't give us a chance. And so there was a press conference that we were doing, and Pamela said to me that she didn't really want her there. And I said, well, we don't get really a choice on that. Mm-hmm. She said that she didn't feel safe when she was in the room because so there was this racist interaction that we had in a courtroom with Emily, where she came up to one of the inspectors and said, I know you're Quizon, and you and I want to ask you a question about this case. And he goes, I'm not Quizon. And she goes, yes, you are. And he goes, I am not Quizon. And she just started berating him. And another reporter said, I don't think that's Quizon. She goes, I think I know what he looks like. And it wasn't him. She was confusing black guys. And so I emailed her and I said, this code of conduct I'm not going to have in the courthouse. You are there at the pleasure of the Superior Court, not us. We as a DA's office do not decide who comes and goes out of the courthouse. We have no control over it. In fact, our staff is even scrutinized and who we can bring in and, who can come in with a gun. You have to go through all kinds of clearances, the inspectors do. And so, there's a no photographs rule that the Superior Court has put in place. It wasn't us, but people were still doing it. And so every time I saw a reporter utilizing a photograph from the courthouse, I had to send them an email explaining the code of conduct. And then they took it as it's our office telling them they can't take photographs, even though they know that it's the Superior Court judge who's doing that, Judge Smiley. So I reprimanded her and I said, look, I need you to, everything needs to go through me. You cannot be approaching attorneys in a courtroom and asking them questions. Like, everything needs to come through the communications office. Like, it's inappropriate to be going up to people in the court, their public workplace, and asking them questions.
Yeah.
Like, gotcha moment.
Yeah. She knows that too. She knows that's a standard. I mean, that's what happens.
And so she didn't like that. And then she became really negative with me. And so then we had a press conference that wasn't at the courthouse. So those rules didn't apply. But you're walking into our office to have a press conference. So you don't get to walk around and go up to people's doors and knock on them and ask them questions. And so because of her previous conduct, they were nervous about how she would be interacting. And I said, well, we don't know until it happens. And during that press conference, she asked like a very it was about a hate crimes case that we were doing. And she asked, well, maybe, how do you know that it was racially based hate? Maybe he did something to him. And we literally just laid out that the guy did nothing to him. And it was just, he was a victim because he was Black. But still in her mind, like, maybe he did something. And we just laid out the case. And so Pamela felt that was like a really kind of, racist kind of way to look at the question. Like, would you say that if it was any other ethnicity? And given what we had happen earlier, where she was mistaking an inspector for an attorney, she's like, I just don't really want to see her at press conferences anymore. And I said, we don't get to make that call. Mm-hmm. I was like, they get to come. If everybody's coming, then everybody can come. I said, but if you want to hold like a small presser and it's like not for all the press, like we pick press to come, that's totally fine. We can have private conversation. We can have these small clusters and conversations. You can decide who you're going to release information to all the time. Like, I'm like, I'm going to give so-and-so at East Bay Times the exclusive on this one because they've been asking the questions and I like them. I like the questions they're asking. So they got an exclusive. It doesn't mean we're trying to hide anything. We're just giving, instead of spreading it out over 12 outlets, we're giving exclusive to one to handle. And she just couldn't handle that she was we didn't trust her. So.
And you shouldn't. You shouldn't. Like, literally, I was talking to somebody that's involved with Berkeley politics, and we were talking about Emily, and he even likes Emily, but he was like, yeah, she's like best friends with the cops. Like, the Berkeley cops will like find her and go and hang out with her. And as a journalist, that is the last relationship you want to have. Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's good to be understanding. It's good to be empathetic of what cops are going to. You do not become friends with them.
Yeah. I mean, but now we're, now we're in this mode of, I mean, I'm pretty sure we're going to get there. This was still all the background of what we were leading up to, right?
Yeah.
Now we have chaos that's going to happen.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, definitely. Let's get into what is going to happen now with The Office and what you see, the chaos that is coming, the disaster.
So, on the day that it's certified, Pamela probably won't be in the office. I think that we know when the certification date. So the day before, she'll have all her stuff removed. There was this story that she was taking out very expensive furniture that she bought. But what I find very ironic is no one noticed that when we were moving in, she was moving in furniture from her home into the office because it's county furniture. It's not the greatest. Like, I literally went to a warehouse in San Leandro to find a desk for myself because there wasn't a desk that you could sit at comfortably without getting carpal tunnel or hurting your back. It was just old furniture. It's like the land of where furniture goes to die. So she brought her desk from home. It was this big, huge, ornate. Well, at first she had the office desk there, but they're awkward. They're 1950s desks. They're not made for computers and ergonomics and stuff. And so she was taking home her desk. And so people have blown that out of proportion, like her own personal desk. But anyway, so she probably won't be there on that day. The number 2 steps up to be DA. The number 2 was Otis Bruce up until about 8 months ago when he left. And Pamela, when she structured this office, the way that it was done, the budgeting has it so that there was like 10 people at the top part of the pyramid, right? And their salaries are all higher paid because they're more experienced attorneys. And that would be like the DA's cabinet. Pamela, but those were always seats that were never filled under previous DAs. So they would be empty. So that's those extra dollars that would be used for those salaries were then funneled into other attorneys as bonuses and extra money. But also anybody in that top cabinet level, that upper echelon, they're not part of the way that the only people that can be fired when we come in the office are the people not represented by the union. And the union doesn't represent the DA or the chief DAs. So everybody else can't be fired. So when we came into office, Terry Wiley is the only person that she could actually fire because he was the number 2. Everybody else that had that level, Nancy O'Malley had moved down into the column where they could keep their job. So they all got kind of demoted, right? And so I believe that's probably what Pamela has done too, is that she's demoted a bunch of people and kept Royal. Royal came in the office like later than the rest of us because he had to transition out of his job at Peralta Colleges. And Pamela picked people in her cabinet that, one, she trusted, 2, people that she's worked with and trusted because she's worked with them. Mm-hmm. And then experience. Royal came in not as a prosecutor, not as an attorney. He came in as an amazing office manager, right? Like a chief of staff. There isn't that position there. So he was given that position. He oversees everything in that office that's not prosecutorial.
Okay.
From grants to the summer interns to the secretary pool to just everything, the new facilities, blah, 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 like everything having to do with that office. Budgeting, payroll, all goes through him. That's why he was hired. He happens to be still in that position. So the recall has caused him now to be DA. Something that I haven't had this conversation with, something that he would probably readily admit that, like, in normal circumstances, he's not completely ready to do, but that's what they've caused. What I'm hearing is that the county is not going to pay him if he's the DA.
Oh.
They're not authorized to pay because he wasn't elected.
Oh.
So he would be doing the role of DA without getting paid as a DA.
Oh my God.
And having to do his current role because no one wants to move up into that role because whoever the county's board of supervisors appoints to this position, the only person they can fire is Royal. Or the person who takes Royal's job if he was able to give that job to someone else, but he's not allowed to.
Oh, Jesus.
They can also fire anybody who's not an attorney in the office. So anybody that came in, like I could have been fired if I was still there because I non-union folks. Although we're county union, but that wouldn't apply. We're all at will of the DA. Like that, our jobs come in with that title of, you know. So he's gonna be DA until the county board of supervisors. 3 of them out of the 5 have to align on someone. And right now I hear there are 12 candidates.
Oh boy.
There are internal candidates, people who are still in the office. There are candidates that Pamela put on leave and they found other jobs other places. And then there's some candidates who used to work in the office and now want to come back and save the day.
Wow.
But, yeah.
Oh my God.
So that person,
I feel terrible for Royal, though. I just want to say that's awful.
Well, not only that, but also just the media scrutiny that he's going to get, as if he can't. I mean, he's just going to try to keep the office functioning because that office can't function without a DA. The DA has to sign off on every filing, and if there isn't a DA in there, everything halts. And so the worst thing that could happen is if Royal says, you know what, I'm not doing this, and he leaves, no one's going to step up to that role because that person can be let go.
So
And no one wants to lose their job. They don't know who's going to get appointed and what their loyalties are and whatnot.
Especially if they go in and do all this work and all this cleanup, all this research, and then they're just laid off.
Yeah. Well, the other component to this is that when Pamela was elected, it was actually a 6-year term and not a 4, because the state was aligning sheriffs and DAs to be in election years versus off years. Because it got less scrutiny. And a lot of these are always decided in the primary because only 2 people are winning and you just need 50% to win the primary. And that's what happened with Yesenia. She won during the primary.
Okay.
So she has a 6-year term. So did Pamela. So what they would do is appoint, that person would serve 2 years. And then in 2 years, there would be an election for a 2-year term. Yeah. That person would then serve 2 years, and then there would be another election for a 4-year term. So we have the possibility of getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different DAs in the next 4 years.
Yeah, it's not like stability isn't important in this position.
I know. And so it's going to be interesting. Like I am writing a letter to the supervisors advocating for one of the candidates. Mainly because I want to listen to the voters, right? And so the voters in 2022 said, we want someone that's going to come from the outside and reform this office and the work that we're doing. Just because there's a recall does not mean that mentality gets thrown out.
Yeah. In
my opinion. The recallers just didn't like Pamela.
You think so? You think that's a big part of it? Not what she represents? I mean, she was a civil rights attorney too, you know?
So here's the thing. They don't like Pamela because the media drove them not to like Pamela. And I will live and die by that thought process. That did Pamela do things that made it harder on her when it came to the court of public opinion? Yes. And we went toe-to-toe on those things. There's things that I didn't agree with, and I said, this is going to harm you. And she stuck to her convictions. You know, one of them was she didn't want to be in the why am I blanking? Davison building. Is that right? No. Renee Davison building. Yes.
Yeah.
I almost call it Rayburn. I went back to DC times. She didn't want to have her office there because when the DA prosecuted her she was a victim of domestic violence from her husband back in the early 80s. And instead of filing charges against her husband, they filed charges against her because she had gone a little nuts and was being disruptive with the police. They weren't listening to her. And so she got arrested. And this DA's office in that building prosecuted her when she was a victim of domestic violence. And she said that she could not do her job fully and respectfully in the hollows of that building. That's why she moved it out to Oakport. She said, I want to be in deep Oakland. I want to overlook the people who this office probably has harmed the most over its time and be able to see that and be reminded of that. And that was her thing. And I was like, that's not going to go over well. But I also respect that you have
conviction.
Why you want to do it, right?
Yeah.
And the same with, hiring different people or firing different people or the stances that we would take on things. Like we filed a hate crimes against someone that I thought was definitely mentally incapable of understanding what they were doing. And for me, during the campaign, we said that one's mental health illness is not going to have a factor in what kind of charges they get. And it was really clear that this person has no idea what they were saying or doing. And I didn't like the enhancement. And so we disagreed on that. And I was a consciousness in that. I would say, I don't like what we're doing. I was also the only non-attorney in the cabinet. So I often was, I wouldn't say brushed aside because I think we all respect each other really well. I think my opinion was negated sometimes because I didn't have the legal background, but I had what I thought the public was going to think or what needed to how are they going to interpret what we're doing and how do I funnel that message out?
Okay.
So my thing is I want a candidate who will communicate, and one that has a record of doing that, and one that's not aligned with people who are going to go down the road of fear mongering and hate and this us against them mentality. And so I still want an outsider. I still want someone who's going to I want someone who's going to communicate. I want someone who is going to make people. It's not about making people safer. It's about making people feel they're safer.
Mm-hmm.
Weird, but and probably inappropriate in some regards. But it's the reality of the situation is we're not unsafe any more than we were even 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago.
Yep.
We just feel like we are. And is there increased property crime? Yes. It's across the country. Is there less murder? Yes.
Yeah.
We're seeing that.
Big time.
Yeah. So it's kind of how you want to gauge it. And so my fun thing that I'm now kind of my big push is one of the candidates is who I'm kind of standing for. And I don't know, I'm not aligned with anybody out there and what they're doing. Like I've kind of severed all thought processes, and this is kind of where I've gone with it, which is I want an outsider who understands the office, can run an office, has run an office, who is a good communicator, who has that track record, who police would want to work with, because that's going to be really, really important in this. I think police were out to get Pamela from the beginning.
Yep.
And then someone that makes people feel calm them being in that office. And there's only one of those candidates that I feel that has that track record. So I'm going to go on a soapbox for them.
Okay.
In 2020, the city of Alameda became the only city in the county that allows our city attorney to prosecute cases through the DA's office. And so they hired even Shen to do that. And Nancy O'Malley's office is like, look, we know what your voters wanted, but we're not willing to have you do anything. We decide who's prosecuted. We do the cases, not your city. Sorry, city. And so neutered them in a lot of ways. Didn't allow them to have access to the calendar, to court scheduling, to files, all kinds of stuff. And the city is trying to do a lot of things that Nancy's office wasn't doing. Nancy's office wasn't doing low-level misdemeanor cases.
Okay.
All DA's office pretty much had stopped. Those became a courtroom clog. And our courtrooms were already clogged because of COVID. And so they were trying to free up a lot of these cases. And a lot of them went to plea deals really fast, or they went to all of our different kind of community court-based stuff, from mental health court to drug court to veterans court to all those alternative courts.
Okay.
And we have 12 different alternative courts in our county system. And so they would go into those. But what was happening is people weren't feeling like locally things were getting done. And so we created the prosecution office here, the city attorney's office, that allows, and they would do rent crime, they would do petty crime, they would do some big cases and whatnot. And so even reached out and said, hey, I think that I might be the right person to replace Pamela, where I still have the mindset of what the voters wanted, but I also have this track record of working with the police in a really good way, that I communicate clearly. And then he convinced me when he told me that he got all of our city council to say, yes, we're on board with you being the new DA. Our city council doesn't agree on anything. It is. And our police chief is a yes. Like, everybody's been a yes. And I was like, this really could work. I mean, he would be the first Asian American DA that we would have. He would be the first openly LGBTQ, which is something that I work in a lot. And I think he would be just the great caretaker that we need at this moment, compared to everybody else. I feel like is coming in with an agenda, either a revenge agenda or, like some type of thing where they're gonna, I mean, they can't come in and fire Pamela's people. I think that's what people don't really understand, is that, like when Brooke Jenkins came into San Francisco, she could let go all of Chessa's attorneys.
Yep.
They can't let go of Pamela's attorneys. They're still going to be there. And so you have to work with them. So you can't have someone that's going to come in and be like the complete opposite and be even harder, law and order than Nancy was. You have to have someone that's kind of in the middle or close to even Pamela, but communicating, working with police, making people feel better about where we're at. And so I don't know what his chances are because, it's a city attorney and he's not physically in that office. I feel like someone who's in that office right now, the supervisors might like. But again, you only have to win over 3 of the 5.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good luck to him then. Yeah, serious. Yeah. But then it all matters too. What does Philip Dreyfus think? What about Chris Moore? Does Chris Moore get to have a say?
I think there's a lot of those folks are Butch Ford folks. And I think that had been the plan early on. Actually, I will say this. I think early on the plan was for it to be Wiley.
Okay.
He was very involved in the NAACP when it came to all of their, at the beginning part of us being in the administration. They had brought him on. He was their spokesperson in front of the TV cameras and whatnot. And I was like, oh, this recall is about getting him into this office. There's no way that the county board of supervisors are going to, not only did the recall change the 22 election, but you're not going to have this county board of supervisors say, oh, well, the person who lost that election, yeah, now we're going to make them the winner.
Yeah. That would look so
That's just
bad.
not going to happen. So he's going to be he's got his judgeship. I'm pretty sure that's going to be, I don't think he's even in the running. But his very close friend and, for lack of a better term, sycophant, Butch Ford, is very much in the running.
Yeah, but it makes you wonder though too if it'll be like the Armstrong thing, when just because their former chief LeRon Armstrong was, popular with the recallers, not popular with the constituents.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, there's also this mentality too of that you've just ousted the county's first Black woman. And so there's a lot of people saying, oh, it should be a Black woman to right this wrong.
Yeah.
And ironically, there's a lot of people who are like, it's not about her. And it's not about Pamela being Black and a woman. And it's like, well, now you want to make it about that?
Yeah.
You can have both. But I mean, I think there are some good candidates. I don't know, this is gonna be one of those things where the voters don't get to decide. They don't have to do this in the public sphere. Like, we don't get forums, we don't get websites and talking points, we don't get mailers, we don't get TV commercials.
And that's how the recallers want it too. Let's be clear. They want democracy out of this process.
Yeah. And that's how, that's what they hoped with the recall of Gascon earlier, just a year ago. And, in the middle of this recall, there's already a Dinah Becton recall effort happening. And, I'm expecting to see the media shift and start focusing on her now.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's why I got out of it. When I was at K-Pix during the Chase recall, I'd be like, why are we reporting this? And you're not reporting that. Like, I would try to talk to the reporters. I would try to talk to editors, and I would just not be ignored. I'd just be ignored. Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's, well, I can back up these claims of bias in the media. It is very real.
Yeah. Well, I will say whoever the county board of supervisors does pick, they have a very difficult road ahead of them in that, one, the budget cycle for each year in that office pretty much is decided in January, early February. Mm-hmm. This person wouldn't be coming in till mid-February. So Pamela's budget is going to be what gets approved by the county board of supervisors.
Oh, that's good.
And they're going to be executing for a year. So if they want to do some radical change and reform in that office, they're going to have to wait 1 full year for the budget to match what they can actually do. Otherwise, they're having to ask for changes in the budget, which are very slow to happen county-wide. So there'll be that. And the other is that I hope the media is as feverishly going to cover when they start cutting programs that have been working. Yeah. The Victims' Rights Office, when we came in that office, they came to us and we said, what is the thing that you need the most? And they're like, well, I would love a cell phone that I could use so that I'm not using my personal cell phone to call victims' families. Because they call me at 2:00 in the morning and it's my own cell phone and I can't, I can't have a block number. So, getting them cell phones. And the other was we'd like water in the office. And we're like, what? We weren't allowed to have the water delivery. The county didn't allow it.
And that's so messed up too, because what's the whole narrative? Pamela doesn't care about victims, not listening to victims' families.
Yeah. So those things, I mean, even like when we asked the attorneys, we're in the Dublin office, we're like, what's the one thing that, Pamela could do in your office that would be really helpful? And they said, oh, we've been trying to get a gym here for a decade. And they had like a broken bicycle thing and they had like a treadmill and there's like no gym there. And they said that they spend all day working, that they don't want to have to then go to a gym. They just want to be able to do it there. It sounds odd, but Pamela was able to get like people to donate stuff because the county can't pay for it, and built a gym there. But then it turned into Pamela's using the office money, our taxpayer dollars to build a gym for her criminal-loving prosecutors.
Oh, Jesus.
Even the best one was when the petition was first going around that was calling for the recall, but it wasn't an official petition, saying that Pamela had put in TVs at Santa Rita. And I just laughed. I was just like, we can't do anything at Santa Rita. It's like we have no power over Santa Rita.
Yeah, that's the sheriff, right? Yeah.
I was like, what's going on? I was like, people really don't know what this office does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so what's happened has happened. I guess I have two questions. One, what do you think's going to happen now that she's gone with Eric Swalwell's lawsuit? And two, do you see any silver lining to any of this?
So Pamela was a civil rights attorney dealing with a lot of labor employment issues for 40 years before she got into the DA's office. Tons of anybody else could see it. They would be civil. In a prosecutorial world, she is prosecuting, but she's going after companies and whatnot, right? She knows how to pick her words very specifically when she says something. She's not stupid when it comes to that. Like I worked with her for almost 3 years and her wording is very specific and her changes to things that I would do was legally specific. And so if you look at what Pamela said, there's no slander, there's no issue. Like it's going to be thrown out. Right. And it was all showboating on his part for a grander cause. One, I would not be surprised, though, that if the candidate of his choosing is chosen, that his brother wouldn't somehow become the chief of inspectors.
Oh.
I always thought there was kind of a connection there. There had been some rumblings around that if Pamela's opponent would have won, that it was going to be Swalwell's brother was going to be the chief of the inspectors in the office. So I could see that there's an ulterior, like I'm waiting and seeing, and I'm putting it out there verbally so that when it happens, people will know that, okay, someone was onto it a little bit. But I think that, I think that's going to magically disappear. And, and I've talked with Pamela since the recall. One, she makes me tired because she's constantly always on the go. I mean, for a woman, she looks younger than what she is. And she is constantly going. She's up early. She's, at the office. And then she goes to events and she's not home till like late at night. And to hear, she said, she was taking this holiday. She's working in the garden a little bit and she's taking some time for herself. Her mom passed away in the middle of all of this. And so she's just taking some time for herself. And I expect her to come back. I don't think she's going to run for mayor. People have said, I think she's going to run for mayor. She's not going to run for mayor. She hasn't told me that, but I'm pretty sure she won't. I think she's going to come back with some type of social justice oriented nonprofit kind of focus in some way to create to keep the DA's feet to the fire in this county. I think that she's going to be a constant voice in making sure that we're and calling out when we're not doing the right thing. That's my hope.
Yeah, that's great. Well, fingers crossed she does. Hopefully we can get her on here sometime, pushing if she does do something like that. That'd be wonderful. Ryan, it's been fantastic. You're a wonderful interview, and it's just great to talk to you anyway. So yeah, it's serious. It's just getting Oh yeah, totally. And just hearing what happened, there's just so much that couldn't come out about this recall and what was happening in the office and stuff. So I appreciate you, informing us and taking the time to inform us on Thanksgiving week.
Yeah. No, I appreciate taking the time and always keeping the focus on what people aren't talking about. And if, to go into more detail on things, we would need 5 more podcasts to go into all the nuances of just even the 3 months that I was in the office. Crazy.
Yeah, well, maybe we should make like a long form narrative podcast. I'm down for it,
chronological, and I can go week by week and be like, this is what happened next. But I appreciate taking the time and hope that you have I know we're in the middle of holidays, so hope that you have a joyful one.
You too. And that's it for this episode of the Doomloop Dispatch. You can find us on all the socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that. And then we, of course, release free episodes on YouTube and your podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But we also have a Patreon account. So if you can come on, listeners, and support us, just giving $1, you'll get episodes for free, and you can actually give us ideas for shows. We just want to be able to pay our StreamYard bill. So again, thank you, Ryan, and to all of the Doom Loopers out there, keep fighting the good fight.